Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce, a podcast about workforce issues in the manufacturing industries. I'm your host, Amanda Del Buno, and in this podcast, we'll focus on workforce issues impacting companies and individuals across industries through in-depth interviews with a variety of experts about many different workforce-related topics. To kick off the series today, I'll be speaking with Guy Loudon, president of the Jane Addams Resource Corporation, about some key manufacturing workforce issues with a special focus on the skills gap. Founded in 1985 and based out of Chicago with an affiliate corporation in Baltimore, the Jane Addams Resource Corporation trains workers and connects them with employers in their manufacturing sector. We'll put a link to the Jane Addams Resource Corporation in the show notes for those interested in learning more about the organization. So Guy, why don't you start off by telling us a bit about your work at the Jane Addams Resource Corporation?
Okay, thanks, Amanda, and thanks for having us on the program. So our mission is pretty straightforward. JARC helps low-income workers, job seekers, and community residents attain financial self-sufficiency through skills training and bundled services. But it's a dual customer strategy because we rely on our employer partners as the end customer in this approach. Our training programs target middle skills gaps in the regional labor market, including CNC machinist, welding, press brake operator, and we serve a variety of populations. So in the JARC model, within these core competencies, there's really two families of training programs. Our careers in manufacturing programs provide job training and employment services for a variety of unemployed adults. So that can be dislocated workers, whose skills are obsolete or not really relevant to the labor market, and they're coming here to learn a new skill set. But it also can include highly barriered individuals, returning citizens, or maybe a female head of household who she's been working, raising kids for the last 10 years, but, doesn't really have skills developed that are relevant to the labor market. And then together with the technical skills training, we also offer an array of bundled support services to create a more holistic approach to helping the job seeker succeed in the training program and then succeed in their life and in their careers once we've placed them on the firm side. We have a second family of training programs at JARC. Our business and workforce services design and execute customized worker training programs on the firm side. So an example of that would be maybe one of our employer partners, they hire people from our programs, but they also have skills gaps among their existing workers. So they have us come in to teach a class. It could be very basic skills like math or print reading, or it could be, more hands-on technical training classes like welding or CNC or forklift operation, things like that. So taken together, our job training and employment programs and on the firm side, our worker training programs, taken together with these programs, we're really trying to be a relevant resource for our employer partners at all points along the skills gaps continuum.
Now, how do your partners get involved with JARC? How can a company touch base and take advantage of JARC as a hiring resource?
So our strongest, our relationships with employers typically start in a couple of ways. They may be looking for quality entry-level hires, and they're having trouble filling the entry-level positions they have. As manufacturing is really rebounding. A lot of jobs are being created or coming back in manufacturing, and people are having trouble filling those positions. So a lot of times our relationships with employers begin by them reaching out to us and seeing if we can provide them with a high-quality entry-level hire. I mean, since 2011, I think we've placed close to 300 people at close to 500 firms. That's just in Chicago. That's not counting also Baltimore. But alternatively, sometimes our relationships with employers begin on the firm side. They uncover skills gaps among their existing workers. Maybe they buy they're investing in a new kind of technology, and they immediately discover that the workers they have aren't really equipped to run that technology. They're not even equipped to be trained to run that technology. But our strongest relationships with employers tend to be with companies where we're working on both sides of the problem. That is, they're hiring people out of our job training programs, but they're also retaining us to do worker training on site with their existing workers. Wanted to say one more thing about employer engagement. One of the things that really builds the relationship is in all of our locations we have what we call an employer industry advisory council. And what that is a group of close industry partners that are key stakeholders to our programs. And so what we do is in order to organize the employer voice in our work, we create industry advisory councils that allow the employers to really share their perspective and their expertise with us, to provide guidance and feedback as to curriculum and program design. Give us feedback on how we're doing, not just with placing people at their firms, but the follow-up. Give us that kind of feedback. It's very important. And also the employer advisory councils help us figure out what kinds of technology we should be investing in and featuring in our programs so that we can continually update our programs and ensure that they're relevant for the end customer, which is our employer partners.
Why don't we jump to the skills gap in the manufacturing labor force? How have workforce systems responded to the challenge?
Sure. So a lot of people are familiar with, there was a landmark study in late 2012, published in 2013, I believe, by the Deloitte firm and the Manufacturing Institute. And at that time, they concluded there were about 600,000 unfilled jobs in the manufacturing sector. And that study really became featured in a couple of very prominent national conversations. One was a conversation around manufacturing is really returning to this country. It's vital to the economic strength of our country. And a related conversation was, the need to update our federally invested workforce system and make it relevant and high performing for the private sector. And so the Deloitte manufacturing study really galvanized a lot of attention around the need to update and improve our federally invested workforce system and make it more responsive to the needs of manufacturing. So the good news is that those conversations have taken a very favorable turn for manufacturing. One of the indicators of that was that in the second Obama term, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act passed by a margin of 413 to 6 in the House and 95 to 3 in the Senate, which if you look at our current political environment, that doesn't happen very often. But what it showed was that there was really a strong public-private support for improving our workforce system and making it more responsive to the private sector. And one of the features of that in the new WIOA, the new Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act, was that it very explicitly now favors sector strategies. That is, focusing on middle skills jobs and career paths in strategic sectors like manufacturing. In fact, manufacturing is called out in the legislation and was very much featured in the political narrative around the passage of WIOA. So that's all the good news. The more sobering news is, despite that, all of that attention, the skills gaps have continued to widen. Deloitte Manufacturing did a follow-up to their survey in 2015-16, and they've concluded that despite these favorable turns, despite this renewed attention and investment in our workforce systems and attention to manufacturing, the skills gaps in manufacturing are projected to widen. They're now projecting that by the year 2025, there will be 2.5 5 million unfilled jobs in manufacturing. So when we talk about all the, a lot of the favorable news that we've seen relative to the labor market, I mean, that's just kind of a sobering, one of the sobering indicators is that in terms of responding to opportunity in manufacturing, in terms of helping to connect lower income workers and job seekers with middle skills, opportunities, jobs, and career paths, we still have a ways to go. And I think that's a challenge that's still in front of the manufacturing sector and organizations like mine and the workforce system as a whole.
And your employer partners, are they seeing that outlook as far as the change in the skills gap and how it's affected an increase? Are they seeing that kind of and planning for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you go to any large meeting of manufacturers and talk to them about possibly besides the steel tariff question at this moment, if you talk to them about where it hurts, they're going to say it's in the workforce. And it's a two-pronged challenge. It's the challenge of finding high-quality entry-level hires to fill the jobs that they're creating or jobs that are coming back. And it's also the challenge of skilling up or preparing their existing workforce to handle the technology that they're investing in order to remain competitive. There's really a third, I would say, there's kind of an overlay too that speaks to both of these problems. Employers are struggling to find quality entry-level hires, and they're struggling to skill up the workers they have. One of the overlay issues is also, though, so-called soft skills or work readiness. So a lot of times what employers will tell you is it's not just the technical skills or lack of technical skills that prevent job seekers from being viable candidates. It's also work readiness, being able to function in the culture and world of work, understanding, hey, the end customer employer partner here needs you at work every single day on time without question. Just kind of skills like accountability and things like that. So that's also part of our job training and workforce development programs, not losing sight of the need to emphasize so-called soft skills. One thing we say at JARC a lot that our employers will nod their heads up and down with is hard skills or tech skills may help you get the job, but soft skills are what helps you keep or lose the job.
Right, definitely. And how do you teach those soft skills? Are those skills that you can teach?
Sure. And I think that's one of the things I think that's innovative about our model. JARC's careers in manufacturing programs, if you visit, and I'm always encouraging stakeholders or anyone out there who's interested in visiting to visit. But one of the things that's very different about our program is that the careers in manufacturing programs at JARC are not meant to look or feel like a school at all. Rather, we run them like a simulated work environment. So one of the things that strikes you when you come into JARC is there's a time clock. You punch in. 1 minute late is late, and you're going to be sitting in a meeting getting a corrective action. So we really, in our training program, our job training and employment programs, we really set and enforce very high standards for behavior, performance, and accountability, because again, it is a dual customer strategy. So what we tell trainees when we're recruiting them and at all points in the program, look, we need you here every single day on time without exception. And if you can't do that, our end customer employer partner can't use you. So we're just wasting each other's time. You didn't come here to train for training's sake. You came here to get a job. So these are the expectations that you'll need to meet in order to complete our program. And just if you look at our curriculum and program design, it's a lot of times, when you visit JARC, you're not going to see lots of classrooms with people sitting around reading in books or going to lectures. It's very much meant to be a very practical, hands-on experience. Typically, the people in our programs didn't succeed a lot in academic environments anyway. But also the nature of what we're teaching and learning here, it is hands-on. So it's more effective for us to have a very project-based curriculum. In addition to enhancing the technical skills training, though, also reinforces the soft skills. Because subtly what's happening underneath is people are learning how to give and receive leadership, how to give and receive criticism, how to give and receive guidance and feedback and work as a team. So that's partly why we run it the way we do. We don't just think it's superior from a technical instruction standpoint. We also think that it tends to cultivate those soft skills and leadership skills that employers are really looking for.
So I think we touched on this a little bit, but what have your partners been telling you that they've been noticing in regards to workforce issues?
Well, they continue to be, they continue to be very challenged in terms of filling the jobs they have. Our employer partners think that we're an excellent resource in terms of providing them with quality entry-level hires. We are a small organization, though, so the question of scale comes into play. Our workforce partners sometimes create more jobs than we have trainees ready to go. Although in our last strategic plan, we've really been focused on scaling our impact. That remains a challenge for them. As I mentioned, skills gaps among their existing workers is a pressing issue. They often come to us with the need for additional classes. One of the things that I think is unique about the JARC approach is we want to be very responsive and very nimble in terms of responding to these needs. So I mentioned earlier that we have an industry advisory council, and I think that cuts to your question because that's one of the key ways that we get that feedback and we get that guidance. That's one of the industry advisory council is one of the mechanism our employer partners have for telling us what's on their mind and what they need. So to give you an example, our careers in manufacturing programs in Chicago has historically had a CNC machining program and a welding program. But a few of our industry partners, including our two largest industry partners, S&C Electric and Friedman Seating, both for a few years now have had real problems filling entry-level positions for press brake. So with their support and their investment and their very active involvement, we have custom designed a new careers in manufacturing program for press brake. And it'll be a 10-week program that takes totally raw entry-level job seekers and teaches them how to program, set up, and operate press brake technology, in addition to some of the good baseline manufacturing skills, and prepares them for entry-level positions at Friedman and S&C, but as well other employers. So that's, I guess, an example of how we try to be responsive to whatever they're telling us. To use the incumbent worker training or firm side training as an example, we have a catalog and we offer firm side training on site in a lot of areas, basic skills, technical skills, safety skills, quality assurance. But we always encourage our employers to say, look, this catalog is just an entry point. If you need something and don't see it, ask, because we can work with you and we can work with our broader network of industry experts and design a curriculum for you and deliver it on site. Alternatively, if we conclude that we're not the right fit, we'll tell you that too, because we don't want to waste anyone's time and offer them a class that isn't really well aligned with what their need is, what the opportunity is. But I think that just in summary, I think that's what manufacturers are telling us is most of the manufacturers we're working with right now are very busy. They're thriving. They're investing in new technology in order to be competitive and take advantage of this rebound, but that those investments in technology then lead them head on into the question of the skills gaps. And those skills gaps occur very much at all points along the workforce continuum, everything from hiring, entry-level hiring, to people they've had in their firm 10, 20 years.
So earlier you mentioned a little bit about how manufacturing is on the rebound, but it's not the most glamorous industry, and I'm curious, how does the perception of the industry impact the ability to find workers? And going a step further, how are millennials, or the next generation, Generation Z, making an impact on the industry?
Well, that's a great question. That's actually a really strategic one. So the good news is that manufacturing has come back. Again, in reference to the Deloitte Touche, it's creating jobs. Jobs are reshoring. But there still is, number one, a very important perception issue. So manufacturing is really struggling to showcase, this isn't the manufacturing of your father, your grandfather. It's higher tech. There is a much richer system of, kind of high-tech jobs and career paths. And so I think they struggle to get that narrative out there. And that, I think, is related to the overall challenge of meeting the skills gaps also. Manufacturing, I think also, one of the challenges related to it is the challenge of establishing a more competitive pull of attraction for millennials and younger workers. Millennials are going to come with a little bit more tech savvy, and some of these skills that would help them adapt to new technologies pretty well, that would help them succeed in training programs like ours pretty well, but you have the perception issue. So that's, I think, where STEM programming in our public schools is very important, not only boosting the skills among youth, high school youth and graduates that'll make them better suited to these careers, but will promote awareness of these careers with the high school graduates and their parents as they consider what options they have going forward. But I think if you look at any industry group today, you'll see that a key part of their strategic outlook is really to do their part in advancing that STEM narrative and helping to position manufacturing and their part of the manufacturing sector as a real pole of attraction for younger kids. I mean, what you hear from manufacturing a lot today is, we want to compete for the smart kids too. We want to compete for the ambitious kids too. So we want kids to know that there are good middle job career paths out there, jobs like CNC machining or automated processes, engineering jobs, computer-aided design. There are those kinds of jobs and career paths out there too. So I think that's something that, a perception that the manufacturing is working very hard to change. I would say this too, kind of looking at labor market data in the last couple of years, the good news for us at JARC has been that manufacturing jobs are in abundance. Our employers, our partners are all thriving. They're investing in new technologies. They're adding jobs. They're hiring our graduates, and they're lining up for more. That's all to the good. What we've seen is wage growth has been much slower. We've seen that dial move pretty positively in the last year or so, but it needs to keep moving. One of the realities is that among a lot of our employer partners in some sectors of manufacturing, wage growth has really not grown as much as it should. And in some places, entry-level jobs in manufacturing aren't much above jobs in less promising sectors, frankly. So I think that's just a challenge we kind of put out there in front of our employers, and we try to get our employers to think about offering more competitive wages. That can be a complicated problem. If I've got 500, 600 employees, I can't just maybe do an across-the-board $2 an hour raise. I've got to think strategically about how to do that. So that's where our work on the firm side comes into play. We've encouraged our employers not just to offer kind of one-off training classes, but to really think intentionally about plant-wide, company-wide training programs that align coursework with demonstration of hands-on competencies, with industry credentials, and then really formalizing all of that into career paths that are very formal and where the worker knows, okay, well, maybe I'm starting at $14 an hour, but if I take these classes and I demonstrate these competencies and I attain this credential, 2 years from now I could be earning $19 or $20 an hour plus overtime. Well, that's a middle class financial situation. And so that's a way to attract better talent and retain better talent. So we've gotten our employers to be thinking about how to invest in their employees and in return offer more competitive salary ladders to retain them.
Kind of moving on a little bit, how has the skills gap impacted incumbent workers, and what impact can it have on capital investments?
So basically, the technological innovations in manufacturing over the last 30-something years have completely revolutionized every sector in manufacturing. We work at JarCare, we work in value-added advanced manufacturing, mostly metal fabricating. So we're talking about machining, welding, stamping, and in every one of those areas of production, technology has just radically transformed how things are made and the cost structures associated with them. So for example, in machining at this point, 30 years ago, when I got into manufacturing as a CNC machinist in the late 80s, early 90s, and at that point, CNC was more or less a new technology. You still saw a lot of conventional machining. At this point, CNC machining, computer numerical controlled machining, computer programmed machine tools, that is the norm. And so that's completely changed the landscape. It's changed the cost structures inside of supply chains. And so in order to remain competitive, manufacturers need to be all in, fully invested in those kinds of technology, even welding. The technology is higher end. There's more emphasis on robotic welding, the ability to program robot technology using CNC and related technologies. Give you an example, our new press brake program. At this point, the technology that we've got here in our training program, you can give me a sketch, a blueprint. Our trainees at the end of 10 weeks will be able to go over to the machine, sketch the workpiece, feed it in, generate a CAM program, and within 10, 20 minutes, they've got a finished part for you to inspect. So the cost structure, the level of efficiency and productivity, that bar has all been raised. So that's all to the good. But then you come up with the skills gaps among your existing workers. Are they really positioned to participate in that? So if you've got if your workforce is composed of people they've been with you 10, 20, 30 years, they've been out of school for 10, 20, 30 years, they might not necessarily have the baseline math and computer skills needed to even train to operate this machinery, much less learn the programming. So that's where skills gaps come into play. Employers in order to remain competitive, need to invest in the technology, but then find that the workers they have aren't necessarily suited to it. Likewise, if they're just hiring younger entry-level workers, those entry-level workers might have somewhat sharper math skills because they're more recently coming out of high schools or community colleges, but they won't necessarily have baseline manufacturing skills that your older workers have. because manufacturing and the trades aren't really emphasized in our public schools anymore. So the need to invest in new technology really goes hand in hand with the need to be thinking about, skilling up everyone in your whole career path, your longer term senior employees as well as your incoming younger entry-level employees.
Right. You mentioned earlier educating current employees, which you do with your employer partners. Are there any other ways these manufacturers could be investing in the knowledge base of their current workforce?
Yeah, and first of all, they should also take advantage in their environment, because it changes from state to state, region to region, but they should also explore in their environment, what kind of publicly invested solutions there are. In terms of, and there's kind of a division of labor there. Within our workforce system, job training employment programs for unemployed adults, that's typically something supported by federal investment. So the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, for example, in Chicago, those resources go down from the U.S. Department of Labor to the state of Illinois, and then passes through Illinois DCO, Department of Commerce Economic Opportunity, to the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. And Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership uses that public investment, that federal money, to fund job seekers going through programs like ours. So that's just, I want employers to be aware that in most environments there's some federal investment to pay for the cost of entry-level people going through a job training program. So really for employers, if they are lucky enough to be in the proximity of a higher performing workforce system, they ought to be able to reach out to job training programs like ours and see if they can hire out of those programs. In terms of, I mentioned there's a division of labor. In terms of incumbent worker training, that typically, there's typically less federal support for that. In most environments, if there is funding for incumbent worker training, it's tended to be, like in Illinois, that historically was more done by the state of Illinois. So in Illinois, we at one time had pretty good worker training programs at the state level, the Employer Training Investment Program and the Job Training and Economic Development Program. Unfortunately, at this time in Illinois, owing to the severe fiscal crisis we've got in Illinois, those state-level training programs have been significantly disinvested. They've got access to some federal funding, but they don't really have the sustainable state-level support at this time that they had in the past. So for the most part, with our employer partners, there isn't public, there are not really grants for it. But what we strive to do is just really offer, as competitive as prices as we have, and they're really pretty good. Where there is grant money, what we do is we leverage some grant money to help employers pay for the cost of on-site training, and then we charge the employer what we call an employer co-pay, where they pay for half of the cost of training. At this time, mostly in Illinois, there isn't really grant money for it, so for the most part, our employers pay the cost out of pocket. But generally, our prices are pretty reasonable, and employers will generally find at the end of training that there is, a substantial return on investment for them. For a class that's a few $1,000s, what they'll typically find is, if let's say it's a class for CNC operators, they'll typically find ROI measures like reduced scrap, reduced setup times, increase in productivity, machine operators being better able to execute their frontline quality assurance functions. And so really employers will find, even if they're worried about the price tag going in, they'll generally find that it pays for itself many times over to invest in skilling up the workers they have.
So we've closed out 2018 and we're right into 2019. How have you heard from your employer partners that they plan to handle the next year and work to improve their talent acquisition overall?
So again, one of the things about manufacturing is it tends to be hardest and last when there's economic downturn. So, for example, in the recession of 07, 08, we didn't see the impact immediately in manufacturing, and it's only by 9, 10 that we really saw it. It was really severe for a couple of years. And manufacturing was slower than other sectors in the current recovery that we're in, but now it's really back, and our employers are really scaling up their workforce. Most of our employer partners have pretty robust hiring outlooks at this time. So in Chicago with companies like Friedman Seating or S&C Electric, in Baltimore with employers out there, we see our employers hiring lots of people, and in some cases where we've developed pretty elaborate firm-side training programs with them. Here in Illinois, we've developed really comprehensive in-plant training programs with companies like Trelleborg Ceiling Solutions and S&C Electric and Friedman Seating, where they're hiring people out of our training programs for jobs like press brake or welder or CNC, but we're also offering a whole ladder of training programs on the firm side, in-house, ranging from just kind of basic skills classes in math and print reading and quality assurance to more hands-on technical classes, to OSHA-related classes, to some higher-end like lean manufacturing and theory classes. So at this time, it's pretty robust. Our industry advisory councils are very engaged at this time. They're coming to us with lots of needs and lots of ideas, and that's driving a lot of innovation here at JARC, helping us to design and innovate new programs, change and adapt the things that we're already doing, and just striving to be as best as we can be and as relevant as we can be for them. It's a time of growth, and it's exciting, and we want to grow and evolve with our employers, and it's a real privilege to feel like we have that credibility with them, and that we are that resource for them, and that they're counting on us to be relevant for them as they need and build opportunities in their firms.
Well, great. It sounds like you're going to be pretty busy in the next year or so.
Yeah, we are.
Well, is there anything else in regard to workforce trends coming up this year that you think is important and our listeners should know?
I guess a few things. One, if you have listeners that are either in the Baltimore, D.C. area or in the Chicago metro area, it'd be lovely to reach out and come for a visit sometime, see our training programs in action. Again, it's a simulated work environment. It's very unlike visiting your typical school. It's an exciting place to visit. If you come from a different environment, though, some other part of the country, whether you're an employer or a workforce intermediary, you're involved in workforce development in some capacity, we're always eager to share what we consider to be our evolved best practices and our program design, and we always love to have visitors. Last year we had visitors from as far away as Korea, from China, national visitors as well. We always love to do that. And we love to learn from people too. So visiting and networking is an important part of what we do. And so it's always a pleasure and a privilege to host people. If you are local to one of us, consider getting involved with our Industry Advisory Council and engaging us more closely and having more input into what we do. I think kind of a third thing I would touch on is from a policy advocacy standpoint. I mentioned that the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which I really consider to be kind of one of the signature achievements of the Obama administration, had been passed in 2013-14 with just overwhelming bipartisan support. Again, 413 to 6, 95 to 3, And what it tells me is that there's really strong support from all stakeholders in having a workforce system that's higher performing and more relevant for the manufacturing sector, and we should all feel good about that accomplishment. But in our current policy environment, I think things are very volatile, and we do see a pretty polarized political environment. And as a result, I think that the policy decisions sometimes happen in a very reflexive kind of way, and I think that we should all just remain very vigilant and continue to really advocate for our workforce system and that necessary resource. So even though WIOA was kind of recreated and reinvested with substantial, almost overwhelming bipartisan support, I don't want to take that for granted and fall asleep at the wheel. I just want to encourage political leadership in both parties, workforce intermediaries in every environment, manufacturers, nationally, regionally, just to really pay attention and make sure that they're following our workforce system and participating and lending a strong voice to every federal budget discussion and saying, hey, this is something that matters to us. We count on it. We count on having a relevant, high-performing, well-invested federal workforce system that steers resources to our regional and local workforce systems and supports our job creation and retention efforts in the manufacturing sector. And you, the political leaderships on both sides of the aisle, need to be cognizant of that and not allow support for workforce development to get kind of sucked into some of the political tensions and kind of fiscal brinkmanship that we see a lot of right now. So that would be kind of my parting thought on policy and just a plea for everyone to be interested and pay attention to things like that.
Yeah, it can be easy to get overwhelmed right now.
Yeah, well, and that's true. Manufacturers are busy running their plants. A lot of them are getting in at 5 in the morning and leaving at 5 in the afternoon, and they're doing that 5.5 days a week and taking work home. So they don't necessarily have a lot of time to also be policy advocates, but maybe just to have that awareness if they get a call from, their workforce system or their workforce providers saying, we need you to lend your voice to this conversation, just to be advised that would be a good thing to do in this environment.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Guy, for your insights.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving me this time. I hope it was helpful, and I hope that your listeners found the content useful. And again, our door is always welcome if you or any of the listeners ever want to come by and see what we do here.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure having you on today, and we hope to have you back again sometime.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, that's it for our first episode. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on a single episode of Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce. I'm Amanda Del Buono, and until next time.